What's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast for the first time since last January. We have a game to process. The Senator Phil Perry's alongside. What we going to talk about? What's the goal of the coaching setup if it's a process? Who popped, who dropped against the New York Giants in the preseason opener? The weekend off for the Patriots. But is it really? Expectations for next week. And then we have a special audio guest. It's Eddie McCaffrey explaining the stretch run play. He was part of the Shanahan offense in Denver. Son Christian, of course, will be in town next week. He's the Carolina Panthers invade. All that and more on Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast with Phil.
Adam Vinatieri moves to 40.
It's time. World champion. And there ain't nothing you can do about it.
Whew. We haven't done that in a while, huh, Phil?
Done what?
Like the intro where I throw to the...
Oh, the moron thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
the moron thing we haven't done in a while. I'm like, we do this podcast like 5 times a week, it feels like.
I know.
We do
But
this
that
all
was-
the time.
I have a higher level of organization, I think, today, because there's really more to get to. And I thought one of the interesting things is a lot of meat on the bone from last night. But Phil, you did an outstanding job as the game went on, Phil A. Perry on the Twitter, of chronicling what the sideline machinations were among the offensive coaching staff. And after the game, I know some people have grown fatigued of this, but had it just been Matt Patricia side by each with the quarterbacks all night long and maybe a visit to the offensive line, probably wouldn't be talking about it. But instead, it was a little more jumbled. Here's Phil asking Bill Belichick a little bit after the game about, well, those machinations.
Bill, how did you feel the communication went offensively with both Matt and Joe relaying signals in there tonight?
Yeah, I don't think communication was a problem. You know, we had 12 men on defense on one play, but otherwise the play clock was pretty. We had plenty of time for the most part. It was, we had a couple injuries and a couple of substitution issues, but overall, those are more. It wasn't the operation. It was guys, a guy being hurt or a substitute, because that caused some other substitution things. So we can clean that up a little bit. But yeah, I thought we were on the ball pretty quickly. I had plenty of time to operate, and we had to audible a few times. We were able to do that. So. I mean, there's plenty of room for improvement. I'm not saying we're there yet, but getting there. Yeah.
And just really quickly, just to follow up, if I could, you mentioned earlier with the offensive play caller, you're going through a process. What do you need to see to make a final decision?
We're going through a process. Simple as that.
Okay. It's just a little bit of an unusual situation for us that have watched you guys before. And so,
what do you want me to do?
I guess we're just looking for a little clarity as to
Great.
why we're seeing what we're seeing.
Yeah. Going through a process.
Okay.
All right, my guy. I was in the studio. You were at the game. You had the spy glasses on the sidelines. What did you see?
Well, we saw Matt Patricia calling plays for the first 2 series with Brian Hoyer. But what I found interesting was between series, how did things go? And what I saw were brief interactions between Patricia and Hoyer, and then a lot of time spent by Patricia with the offensive line, as you'd expect, I guess, because he's the offensive line coach. But because he's the play caller, I assumed that he would be spending a lot more time with the quarterbacks than I witnessed. So there was some exchanges, but it was almost like they were passing exchanges, like on the bench area, standing up kind of in the middle of the bench, sharing a couple words, and then right before Brian Hoyer goes out into the field and Matt Patricia has to start calling plays again. That's what it looked like to me through those 2 series. It was really just 2 series, Tom, with Patricia and Hoyer in that setup.
The image we've become accustomed to of Josh McDaniels sitting next to Tom Brady or Mac Jones with his hands in the pocket of his hoodie, shoulder to shoulder with the quarterback for the entire defensive series, that wasn't going on last night.
It didn't look that way to me. Now, there were times where Patricia would come over and spend a little bit more time with Brian Hoyer towards the quarterback's end of the offensive bench. The quarterbacks in the line are kind of as far apart as you can get on the offensive half of the Patriots bench. And there was a point later in the game where Patricia actually spent a fair amount of time with Bailey Zappi, even though he was not calling plays for Zappi, and it was Judge who was attached to Zappi's hip. But I would just say overall, Tom, it looked to me like Patricia's show early, not only because of the play calling, but there was also a moment where, if you remember, Bailey Zappi's first series was a disaster, right? It was 3 plays, negative 17 yards, I think.
Yeah.
They got called for 3 penalties. It probably should have been 4 with an intentional grounding at the end. And Bill Belichick wasn't happy. And he went over to start to talk to various position groups on the offense. Patricia sort of butted in and said, I got this. And then gathered the entire offense around him and delivered some sort of message. How impassioned he was, it's hard to tell from where we were standing. But that to me looked like something that an offensive coordinator would do. That was not something that Joe Judge did throughout the course of the night. He was very specifically, almost exclusively with the quarterbacks throughout the night.
That's really noteworthy. Look, for all the times that I've questioned the effectiveness of Patricia in different ways, I'm willing to clean slate it. And if he's going to take the wheel and take ownership, then good, because I think that it's hard right now to understand exactly what the endpoint destination is. So if he's been told to take the wheel, take the friggin' wheel. What was Bill's interaction? Much more significant just from the television as I was in studio with the quarterbacks as they came off the field. Not that he never talked, but he rarely talked to Brady. It was not an interaction that was consistent. What did you see from Bill?
I don't know if you could see this, but there was a timeout during the second Hoyer drive. And Hoyer starts walking over to the sideline. And we're sitting up there in the press box saying, oh, this will be interesting. Who's he going to meet with? Because even though Patricia was clearly calling the plays, Joe Judge was standing right next to Patricia during those sequences. Bill Belichick was not. Bill Belichick was giving both those guys their space, is what it looked like while Hoyer was on the field. He was a good 20, 30 yards away from those guys. But as Hoyer starts walking to the sideline to talk to Patricia, which is what ended up happening, both Judge and Belichick walk over to be right next to right next to Patricia. So it ends up being sort of a 4-person huddle. Again, it's hard not to see something like that and say, is Bill specifically, is Bill doing this just to kind of muddy the waters for us? For those of us watching at home, or those, and that feels very like a very self-centered thought, but I can't figure out why he would have both of those guys do what they did last night, other than to just kind of cloud the picture. I guess it's just getting both of them reps just in case, or it's still a competition, or he still doesn't know what he wants to do. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out why this was what was best for the football team.
Yeah, and that's what I want to drive into. But it is a chicken or the egg situation with this. I think that folks scoff at the effort we're expending on it, but we're expending effort on it because Bill's expending effort on playing a shell game with something that should not be that complicated, unless this is truly a process, and I don't doubt that it is a process. But what's the end goal? I get that it's a process, but what's the end goal? If you're doing what's best for the football team, has Bill decided that a collaboration on both sides of the ball among all coaches is the best way to do it? Because he somewhat has done that on defense. The collaboration between Gerard, Steven, and Bill is the overlord, but those guys have a lot of sway. But certainly DeMarcus Covington, I think, and Brian Belichick, as the coaches have said, all have an opportunity to quote unquote present. So there's a lot of chiefs or a lot of VPs of everything.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
So has Bill decided collaboration is the best way to do it and have a versatile coaching staff in the same way he has a versatile football team, or covets that? Or has he been forced to do this and not have a named coordinator on either side of the ball, or a sole coordinator? Because obviously Brian Flores was the coordinator and Matt Patricia was the coordinator and back on the defense. Is he forced into it because he didn't get Bill O'Brien? That's where it's hard. I've said this. I don't think the 2000 Bill Belichick taking over the New England Patriots would have said, okay, I don't have coordinators on either side of the ball that are named. We'll just do it so like everybody gets a chance to tell everybody what to do. Because Phil, you played a hell of a lot more organized sports than I did. Phil was a fairly accomplished player in a variety of sports. Did you ever have a couple of coaches and one would say, as you pitched, hey, watch that lead arm, it's starting to flail open. And as you're going, the other coach says, make sure your stride isn't too long. And then now you have a lot of info coming at you.
Not only do you have a lot of info coming at you, but it might at times be conflicting info, right? And I've talked to players who've played for Bill Belichick. When the roles were much more clearly defined, there was a head coach in Bill Belichick, there was a defensive coordinator, and there were position coaches. And you would sometimes get different messages from all three as to how to do something. And then you go with what Bill tells you because it's Bill. But to even be in that position is not what you want. So now with the titles not as clear and the hierarchy outside of Bill Belichick being the head coach, maybe being a little hazier, I think it would complicate things for the players too. And I would just say, just in terms of the last observation from the sidelines, I mean, I'll answer any questions you have, Tom, but and I like doing that. And I ended up missing like a handful of plays, I would say, last night, but I like doing it because I know people have the ability to watch the game on TV. And I can see things on the field that they might not be able to from our vantage point. But I know you're not watching the sidelines, and I know you don't have the ability to watch the sidelines play after play after play the way I do. So that was my goal last night. And I wrote up a story on NBC Sports Boston.com that people can check out, as well as the tweets, if they haven't done so already. But like, just as far as, again, that hierarchy goes, you mentioned Bill Belichick spent some time with the quarterbacks. He spent a lot of time with Bailey Zappi. And was getting within 6 inches of his face, and not, trying to intimidate him or berate him for any reason. But there was some pretty intense one-on-one coaching going on there from Bill Belichick to a rookie quarterback. And then later with Bailey Zappi sitting on the quarterback's bench next to Joe Judge, Bill Belichick sort of interrupting whatever those two were going over on the bench. And he gets down with his hands on his knees so that he can get sort of like at eye level with Bailey Zappi. And it is a very focused one-on-one conversation for, I don't know, 3-4 minutes. And we're just not used to seeing that. That was such Josh McDaniels' realm. He very rarely even ventured over there between series. And if it was to share something briefly. I feel like, Tom, you never really saw that kind of what looked like detailed coaching with a young quarterback coming from Bill Belichick before. I just haven't seen very much of it. I also haven't been paying as close attention as I was last night, probably. But it's all new. And then you'd have not only the quarterback paying attention in a situation like that, but Joe Judge is also hanging on every word. He's sitting right there trying to take it all in too.
There's 89 other players. Bill is a born teacher, and his parents were, and he's gifted at it. There's 89 other players who are operating at that point. I wonder why he feels it's the best use of his time. And I'm not second guessing him by saying this. I'm not. Why is it the best use of his time in that particular moment to coach up Bailey Zappi with that level of intensity? And, maybe Mac Wilson gets the same thing and we're not seeing it. It's interesting to see how the greatest coach who's ever done it operates, what his bedside manner is now that he's without one of the best offensive coordinators of all time. And I mentioned that last night on Twitter, and I got so many people saying, yeah, sorry about that, but McDaniels was not a good offensive coordinator. I'm like, what are you people watching? What's the end goal? My feeling on the end goal might be that if Joe Judge is spending all this time apprenticing, and he told us in the spring that he spends time practicing how he's going to call plays in his office, and he then is splitting time and getting second team reps as a play caller, the goal is eventually to let Joe Judge be the play caller. I don't know if that's for this year and this year only, and then they hire an offensive coordinator, or if Joe Judge is going to be here for a while as the offensive coordinator. But again, I don't understand what the end goal is. You have any idea?
Well, Tom, that would make sense if the guy who had the job in the here and now, who was helping the apprentice along, had any experience whatsoever with offensive play calling. You know what I mean? If
Yeah.
it was Charlie Weiss who was here, or just to pick a name, and
It's like having an
that
apprentice
offensive
mason watch the electrician put up a chimney.
like if you had an
Hey, good one
offensive
by me.
coordinator who was about to retire, and you wanted to let this other guy do it a little bit and watch the guy who has been doing it for a long time go about his business so that he had a better idea of what to do when eventually it is his turn, it's the apprentice's turn, that would make sense. But you're having a guy potentially apprentice to be the next guy when the guy who's the guy right now has never done it either. So he should be apprenticing from someone at some point in time here, right? So it just does not make a lot of sense to me. It felt like, Tom, too long of, I don't want to call it an audition, but it was too long a stint of play calling from Joe Judge to say, well, they're just preparing for an emergency. Because we've seen that before too, right? Like even when McDaniels was here, they might have Chad O'Shea call plays for a drive or two, almost as if to prepare for, well, Josh had a medical emergency or something, or couldn't show up to a game for whatever reason, and they just wanted to have a guy who had done something before and let them do that. This was more than that, and so that's why it's so interesting to me.
Well, we'll monitor as the weeks go on. It's all we can do. It's all we can do, folks. We'll monitor, and I'm not going to render a judgment as to whether it's stupid or not. It's uncharacteristic. It's unconventional. But until I see the offense rudderless and not making progress, leave it alone. I will defer. I will defer my judgment. But I'm going to point out with what we're seeing. Plenty of meat on the bone from last night. Let's get to that. Start with the guys on defense. Let's do some popped and dropped. Who popped defensively for you, Phil?
I really liked what I saw from Mac Wilson. That guy can run.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought they had a variety of linebackers who showed up in that regard. Anthony Jennings looked to have some burst off the edge. Josh Uche got plenty of run. We know he's fast. But Wilson, to me, you saw him used as a blitzer, saw him in coverage a little bit, saw him make a couple of hits, saw him hit the quarterback. I know they've been impressed with his versatility, and I think he's going to really kind of wedge his way into the hearts of Patriots fans because of the way he plays. He's so physical. He's not a big guy, but he loves contact. You can tell the way he practices. And I just thought, even watching back some of it this morning, the day after, it was almost more apparent from the television copy than it was up in the press box, just how fast he was. He really was moving well, I thought. We're not used to seeing that from second-level linebackers here.
Talk to me about Cam McGrone, who I think may be a dark horse Patriots Hall of Famer one day.
Stop it. Well, you tell me about him if you feel that way.
I just think he's so fast. I think he's so fast, and I loved his Michigan highlights. But I think, we saw a few near-miss ricochet picks, which, let's be honest, as fantastic as the Patriots linebackers have been, they were a little bit more lumbering in past years, and they didn't have the closing speed. I'm not saying the guy's friggin' Jacoby Ellsbury out there, but he got after it pretty good on some of the balls that were in the air. And that's what they need, a coverage linebacker who can hit and stick, and he's got plenty of highlights that showed that he could do that at Michigan. So, again, Gerard Mayo spoke to us in February when we were at the Super Bowl about being faster and more explosive on defense. And certainly the fast end of things is showing up. Defensively, again, fast playmakers. Jack Jones came kind of as advertised. 3 near misses on pass breakup / picks. He's a gambler. And if they're going to play zone, you are entitled to gamble if you're going to play zone a little bit, as long as you get that work behind you. And his instincts and intuitiveness and smarts all showed up a little bit. That's the rookie from Arizona State. He popped for me. Phil, your turn.
Yeah, just to add on Jones, you can see why he's sort of the quote-unquote ball hawk that we all believe that he will be, at least from my vantage point where we're behind the defense. You can see him watching the quarterback through whoever his assignment is. So he's on the boundary and he's playing his man and he can see his man, but he really has his eyes on the quarterback and he's ready to break on the ball. There was one where there's miscommunication between the quarterback and the receiver. The receiver breaks in, the quarterback throws an out, and Jones ran the route better than the receiver did because he had his eyes in the backfield while still taking care of his assignment. So liked what we saw from him. The secondary, we can get into some dropped. So I don't want to get
drop
there
him.
yet.
Drop
I'm
him.
going to drop Jawan Williams. I mean,
Has to be. He
I
might be
don't
dropped
know.
from the entire
I don't know
roster,
what else you do with
unfortunately.
him at this point. I don't know what else you do with him at this point, Tom.
I mean, every single guy they've drafted is better than him.
It's hard to argue, and I get why you're trying to make it work. He's a second-round pick from years ago, but use him outside, use him inside, use him on tight ends. There's nothing that he's done defensively that I don't think any of us have seen and said, "Oh, there's something to build off. Maybe he could do that." We're still waiting.
Up front, how about we had our guy Ted Johnson was over the moon about Sam Roberts and LeBron. What the hell's LeBron's last name?
Ray.
Yeah, Ray. Were you also over the moon? And I love Josh Uche. I'm just a huge Josh Uche fan. But
I liked what we saw from both of those guys. I thought both were disruptive, and we've seen it from Ray in practice. We really haven't from Roberts. And Roberts is the guy who was drafted. He's the Division II Player of the Year, I believe, last year. And now you're sort of waiting to see, okay, what did he bring to the table that the Patriots saw that they felt they needed to use a draft pick on him? And I think we saw some of that last night. So good for him on that front. I think, it'd be interesting to see which of those two guys maybe they end up keeping, because I'm not sure you would keep both, because they both kind of look like specialty interior pass rush type guys. I don't know if either of them fit the profile as like a run stuffer.
yeah, going to have to get him through to the practice squad. Flip to the offense. Tyquan Thornton, we've talked about him a number of times during camp and how impressed we've been for him. And I said when he was drafted, like, this guy's going to have an apprentice year. It's way too crowded a wide receiver room for a guy from Baylor to have any kind of relevance in his first year with the New England Patriots offense. But I am off of that statement. And I think he can make an impact.
I can't wait for you to make good on our chicken wing bet at Splitsville when he goes over 20 and a half catches for the season.
And
I can eat a lot of
just to
wings.
remind you, that will be when we have the 42-minute club. For all of you who stick around for the 42-minute club, it'll be the Splitsville Howl at the Moon Top Golf event that we're going to have to celebrate Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast featuring Phil Perry.
Do we have like a party bus that's going to take us around to those different locations, or how are we working that?
Yeah, we're going to go to a number of different places, and then we're going to go to Davio's, which we will have the bus that will drive us down Patriot Place Ave over to Davio's.
I guess a lot of the three of those are within walking distance of each other.
Yeah.
Offensively, outside of Tyquan Thornton, and I just love the touchdown because it was a legitimate route, and you see the head and shoulder fake, and you see him create separation that way. He's not just a straight line speed guy. So if they've hit there, Tom, and he is actually a good player, that makes more of an impact on your offense overall than Cole Strange, maybe even being an all-pro guard. The receiver position just matters.
Is Cole Strange an all-pro now?
No, I'm just saying, like, Tyquan Thornton being a very good receiver.
You really like Cole's night.
No, I'm just saying, if he's good, if Tyquan Thornton is just good, I'm not saying great, I'm not even saying very good. If he's good, that could impact your offense more than Strange really hitting in the first round, which we don't know if that's going to happen.
I have an issue with help. I have a big problem. We all watched the game. We've talked about it at length. Take me inside the offensive line depth of Haran, Onwenu, Kajust. These guys are now elevated into positions. We've talked about this in the offseason, about the tackle position being dicey. Isaiah Wynn has been down a little bit this week, did not play. He probably wouldn't have played anyway, but had been out of practices as well. I'm concerned about the Haran, Kajust, Onwenu, Isaiah Wynn contingent. I have fewer concerns about Andrews, Ferentz, Strange, and Trent Brown. But that's half of the offensive line group that I'm like, they got to be able to run these guys out there? Am I overstating?
No. Listen, what we've seen, not just since Wynn and Brown have been the starting tackles for the Patriots, but over the course of many years now, whoever your third tackle is, and sometimes even your fourth tackle, those guys end up playing really important roles for you during spurts of your season and can win and lose you games. And Justin Herron should be somebody that's a dependable third or fourth option. He hasn't looked like either over the course of this camp. And he had 2 penalties last night. He got hurt on 2 different occasions. And so, he has no control over that. But he had a really rough practice on Monday. He gets in a fight, a week ago today that gets him kicked out of practice. It's just been a tough camp for him. And Yadni Kajust, who has sort of seized the opportunity that Herron's poor play, I felt, has opened up. He's taken advantage of that, but then he got hurt last night. So now you have 2 hurt backup tackles that are backing up 2 guys that are often hurt. And one of them is hurt as we speak right now, and Isaiah Wynn. So I don't know how you could feel great about the depth there. They've got to figure that out because at that position, Tom, it's just so rare to find guys who can actually play. I don't see reinforcements coming.
Yeah, and it demolishes your chances of being the offense you want to be. And we're going to hear from Ed McCaffrey, as I mentioned towards the end, talking about blocking schemes and a lot of that stuff. So if you want to get into the X's and O's of the stretch and what players have to do, you listen to that and then look at what the Patriots are at this point trotting out there. Phil, the Patriots are not practicing, or at least not having public practices. Certainly today, the day after the game, and then again Saturday and Sunday, we will not have access. But I think it's important because you're going to hear a lot from 2 to 6 on both radio stations. There'll be a lot of conjecture on our shows. I think that you're out of your mind if you're under the impression the Patriots aren't working. If you think the Patriots are going to Newport, Winnipesaukee, the Cape, or Bar Harbor, you're out of your mind. They are doing things. We don't have access, but I would not be the least bit surprised if they're not standing there for a long time, walking through, repping, film work, every other thing, because it just would defy all logic for Bill Belichick to be trying to implement these things and then say, oh, look at the time. Let's get out of here.
It would defy all logic, and they clearly need the work. We don't know exactly what they'll be doing or how many days they'll be doing it. But Tom, it's been a slow ramp up to things throughout camp. I mean, you wrote about it earlier this week. I asked Evan McCourty about it a few days ago, and he acknowledged, we're not tackling, we're not doing goal line, and he actually was like, I'm in year 13 here. I'm not complaining. So I just wonder if there's some sports science component to all this where Bill says, you know what, these guys do need 2 days off every 7. And so,
but I think the notion of off, the notion of off that I think we're perceiving is overstated.
But I think Tom, they were away at least one day.
Absolutely,
away, completely away, like not at the facility. One day this past week.
I believe that. Yeah, and that makes sense. But it defies logic for me to think that they're going to be blowing out of there at noontime today, or 5 o'clock, and they won't be seen again until Monday morning.
You don't really? Oh well, yeah.
I'm going to get to the bottom of it.
Out of there. Yeah.
No way. He's not going
noontime today to Monday, but what if it's noontime today to
noontime Sunday?
Noontime Sunday. Could you see that?
How many days is that? Is that 2 days? Saturday, Sunday? I don't know. I would say full day today, and then. I mean, you can't. These guys didn't play last night. But the players who matter didn't even play.
They're just doing less. You wrote about
it. Doing less activity physically is one thing. Taking fewer physical reps, I mean, they got to be standing on those friggin' fields walking through. I mean, I've seen them when I'm leaving the press box, when I've left the press box really late at 5:30 in the afternoon. Obviously, they can't do double sessions, but they're doing walkthroughs in the late afternoon. So, when we say, okay, they practiced at 10, they're still out there. They're still in the joint until 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night, some of them. Anyway, we don't know until we know. We're not going to speculate. Of course we will. What do you think is going to happen next week when Carolina comes in? Ratcheting? We keep waiting for the ratcheting. I keep promising ratcheting. Will there be ratchet?
Yeah, there's got to be. Because, I mean, they're what? They're 4 weeks away from their first game? A little less than that? You've got to do you've got to ratchet at some point. And I think Tuesday and Wednesday will both be hard practices. Thursday's not a practice day. And then Friday, I highly doubt I think it's going to be the same thing we saw against the Giants. So your starters, some of your backups, they get a lot of work, competitive work, physical work, Tuesday and Wednesday, Thursday off, essentially Friday off, because you don't want to get those guys hurt. But that's what I am anticipating. I think it's going to be like Philly. Remember, they played in Philly, and both Cam Newton and Mac Jones played in that game last year, but it was pretty light in terms of what the other starters on the team saw in terms of action in that game. Coming off of joint practice.
Feels like 6 years ago we were in Philly. Unplanned, but I'm going to ask you this because I have just an observation relative to Tom Brady taking perhaps as much as 2 weeks off in training camp, and Bill Belichick taking days off. And I mean, again, I can't even believe that they're doing that 2 weekends in a row, to the point where I won't even say that that's what's happening. But these guys are lost without each other. They're not even themselves anymore. I mean, Brady never would have taken 2 weeks off during training camp if he was with the Patriots and Bill Belichick was his coach. And Tom Brady never would have said, "Oh, Bill, we can't take 2 days off. It's training camp." I mean, these guys, both of them, it's funny how they got the space they wanted from each other, and now they're just not who they were. Isn't it wild?
It is really interesting. It's just, is that just a product of, well, both have had so much success now at this point that the
rules
approach is different? Or is it just the changing game? Is it just sports science is a thing now? 2-a-days are no longer a thing.
But he's operating without offensive coordinators and 4 guys on his staff. He never would have done that in 2000. I mean, both of these guys are so far different from who they were in 2000 or even 2014 or even 2017. It's really interesting how these two greats of the game, the greatest coach and greatest quarterback, are evolving in this, what is the winter of their careers.
Agreed. But you would think that things like how to approach a given season, how to work smarter, not harder, are things that they would have pretty well defined by now and have honed. But you're saying that they're kind of experimenting with being a little bit more loose in terms of their preparation.
Not only that, but you don't have an offensive coordinator. You didn't have a succession plan. I mean, just things that the detail-oriented nature, or I'm not saying they're not on the details, Bill is not, but it's totally different than we would have expected a decade and a half, certainly 2 decades ago, in terms of an approach. Now it's more, we'll figure it out.
I know we're getting late.
Okay.
I know we're getting late into the podcast, but can I ask you something? Because you calling Joe Judge the play calling apprentice is interesting to me, because it alludes to the fact that there's a long-term plan here.
Yeah.
And are they making your point, which is this is a bridge year, and there's no way we're going to get it to look the way we wanted to. We lost Josh McDaniels. We had him for 20 years. It's just not going to happen. In the same way, 2020 was, he didn't call it a bridge year, but he called it, what did he call it? A reset year in terms of the cap and the roster. Bill Belichick did. He called it a reset year, 2020. Is this another reset year, but on the coaching staff with the long-term play in mind? We're going to change the scheme. We're going to get some coordinators really ready here. And next year, the year after that, we're going to hit the ground running. Maybe by the time he's ready to actually move on to the next chapter of his life, whatever that is, Bill Belichick. So, so 2023, 2024, that's what I have my eye on. Is that what is happening here? And is that a good idea? Because I think there should be more urgency to take advantage of, honestly, the first thing that comes to mind for me is your young, cheap quarterback.
Yep. But you can't force it. Even if you'd like to do that, if you don't have the resources to do it, you're not going to make them materialize. So you got to go with what you got. And they've already made their decision when they left Port in the offseason. This is what we're going to do. Maybe there were conversations to try and bring Bill O'Brien back. I don't know. I mean, we don't know what they're doing. So in lieu of a concrete plan that we can say, this is what we're doing, you have to presume that they're just kind of winging it.
It just
And
feels
for the people out there who think that Bill Belichick doesn't wing it, he does, because he subscribes to the notion of sometimes no decision at all is the best decision you make.
And I just the long-term view is something that is now bouncing around in my brain for this team the last few days. Number one, because Bill Belichick, after the game last night, when he was first asked about the coordinators, the play caller exchange last night, he said, we did a few things that I think will be beneficial for us over the long term. I'm paraphrasing, but he used the word beneficial and long in terms of how he's looking at his decisions with these games. And then I heard Albert Breer on Toucher and Rich this morning say, and I believe he said this before, but one of the reasons Bill O'Brien didn't end up in New England is because they wanted to make sure they had somebody who was going to be here for more than 1 year. And there was some concern that he might come here, have a good year, and then end up a head coach somewhere else. And then you're starting fresh here in New England in 2023. Well, he said something about Nick Caley that I haven't heard before, which was, the reason Caley wasn't promoted, or one of the reasons maybe Caley wasn't promoted, it sounds like, based on what Albert said, was that he didn't sign an extension with the Patriots. And so maybe they're concerned that he's not going to be here next year. And so that's why he wasn't actually elevated, because same issue with O'Brien. You're worried he has a pretty good year, and then he ends up walking and you're starting from scratch in 2023. It just feels to me like everything is, these decisions that are being made in like 2 and 3 year buckets, and not what are we doing right now to win right now.
And to go bigger picture here late in the podcast on an interesting aspect of what all the undercurrent to it is, there's a lot of personnel folks who've left. There's a lot of coaches who are on the staff and are not on the staff who wanted to go, who were all set, who felt they had gone as far as they could, or just weren't into the way things were done here. We know that Bill is an overlord in the personnel department. And we've seen the number of guys who've gone out, whether it be Caserio or Monty Austinford, now Dave Ziegler. We've seen the coaches go out, McDaniels, Flores. These guys, they get an opportunity to go elsewhere and make more money. They're going to do it. But there's also, prior to them leaving, a feeling of overworked, underpaid, spread thin, get no credit, and want to go someplace. So maybe it's no wonder it's hard for them to get long-term commitments from guys. And the guys that they're bringing in are coaches who need a rehab. Not a rehab, but, a renovation, a resurrection. So that's the undercurrent to all of this as well. And Nick Caley being a prime example of that. I mean, Gerard Mayo would like to have a head coaching job, makes no secret of speaking widely and loudly about that. Same thing with Josh McDaniels. Yes, they all want head coaching jobs. But that's the undercurrent to the coaching staff as well, isn't it, Phil? I mean, you've covered the team as well as I do. You know people around the organization. That's part of what's going on too.
No doubt.
It's not an easy joint to work.
It's a hard place to work. It's exactly what I was just going to say. And the flip side of that, though, if you're Bill Belichick, is you've brought in two guys who are looking to, rehabilitate their image as coaches, but are also seemingly extremely loyal. And so Bill Belichick's going to be able to share his vision for the offense and mold it and have them carry out that vision. But he also, I'm sure, has some sort of long-term commitment from them that they're happy to keep, because they are where they are in their careers right now. And they seem Patricia especially seems to have an extremely close relationship with Bill Belichick, and I think would do whatever the guy asks. And so it's the opposite end of the spectrum you're talking about, where guys are looking to go. I don't think Matt Patricia is going to be in that boat anytime soon.
Yeah, but it's just they don't have people are not beating down the door. And we've talked to people in the league about this. We've talked to coaches around the league about this. People are not beating down the door to go work for the New England Patriots. Believe it or not, folks. They don't pay great. The work and level of commitment is absurd. And the expectations are an absolute grind in a way that they are not anywhere else. So maybe that's why they're a little bit pockets turned inside out when it comes to the coaching staff. All right. Talked about Ed McCaffrey, former Denver Broncos, great running that Shanahan offense back in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Borderline Hall of Fame player. I asked him during an interview on Sirius NFL Radio about the difficulties of implementing the stretch. And he and his co-host Alex Marvez said, we're going to get to that after the break. Here's the audio from Ed McCaffrey on the stretch play, on changing your scheme to incorporate it more, and just how much it takes. It's a good listen, so I hope you enjoy it. We've gone deep here, 45 minutes by the time you're done listening to Ed McCaffrey. We'll talk to you guys on Tuesday, updating you on what's going on with the Panthers. See ya.
Normally, when we have on a media guest or even a player guest, we're the ones asking the questions. Well, the tables were turned on us a little bit here by one Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston. He was just on helping us preview that upcoming Pats game and giving us a state of the team. And, a little bit sobering for some Patriots fans because it has been a little bit of a bumpy preseason in practice, according to all accounts, to say the least. That being said, though, Tom Curran wanted you, Ed, to answer a question about running schemes, the difference between outside zone schemes and the more power gap man schemes. Different teams run it different ways. Fill us in a little bit about this topic, please.
Well, you could talk about these schemes for a year, and it really depends on your personnel and your coaching style. The outside zone, some offensive line coaches are insulted when you call it outside zone. They like to call it wide zone, and they call inside zone tight zone. Rarely when you're running an outside zone play does it actually go outside, but it could certainly do that. Usually it cuts somewhere in between the edge defender and somewhere out around the hash mark. So some people call it stretch. Doesn't really matter what you call it. It's a whole system. So just the outside run play itself is an entire system involving multiple two-man combinations on the front side and back side of the play. It gets more complicated when you introduce different personnel groupings and different formations. So, for instance, you could run a wide zone play out of 21 personnel, which is what most pro-style West Coast offensive coaches consider their base offense. That involves a fullback and a tight end. Well, now are you running a full flow to the tight end with the fullback? Are you running split flow to the tight end with the fullback going the opposite way? Are you running to the open side with the fullback, or split flow without the fullback? And then in addition to that, every one play is really two because you're coaching the front side and the back side. Center and guard have to communicate. Guard and tackle have to communicate. Tackle and tight end have to communicate. And then there's 36 minimum basic fronts that involve different two-man combination calls. Now, if defenders mug and bug bringing linebackers up, you could potentially turn that into a 3 or 4-man combination play. So just the communication up front on the line, just for that, we didn't even get into 11 personnel and 10 personnel and motions and shifts. So it's a whole entire language. And if you haven't done it, then it does take time just to install the outside zone scheme. Then you get into inside zone. And so really the moving parts are outside versus inside, 21 versus 12 versus 11 versus 10 personnel, open side to weak side, full flow, split flow. Just that one play is really like 20 plays. So in order to put in an outside zone scheme versus with multiple personnel groupings going both to the strong side and weak side, and knowing that every one play is really two, think of the time that takes to put in. So now what other plays are you going to have off of that? If you are going to teach, power and counter, and counter really is zone to one side, but and so there's similarities, but now it's a different blocking scheme. And so how many blocking schemes can you coach? Well, at the NFL you have time to put in multiple blocking schemes, and all teams do, but how much time are you going to spend doing that? Time is our most valuable asset. So to get guys up to speed and be really good just at the outside zone schemes, which involve multiple combination blocks versus various fronts, to get really, really, really good at that takes time. And so, you can't be great at everything, but as a play caller, you still want enough variation to keep defenses on their heels and to attack certain fronts. But you have to make that big decision. Look, how much time am I going to spend on this other stuff? What do we want to live out of? So in college, where you don't have as much time, look, you got to pick your poison. You can't do everything. But in the NFL, you do have more time, but it takes time to learn. It takes a lot of time, and really more than anything, repetition with your guys, practicing their fits on those two-man combinations and communicating up and down the line. So we heard the story earlier about, a defender walking right through the line of scrimmage. Yeah, someone directed the point probably in the wrong direction. In these plays, to make it more complicated, some outside zone plays are Mike declared, some are Will or Sam declared, some are zero declared, some are tight end declared, some are box declared, and it's all telling the line, are we accounting for the strong safety? Are we blocking the box? I don't want to get overcomplicated. You just need to know that when you say outside zone, one, some people get offended by that and say it's wide zone, but it changes everything. Like every time you add another person into the box or into the front, or add a fullback or take out a tight end, it changes the play. It changes the combination blocks versus every front you're going to see. And it's really just a whole language. So think of wide zone, or outside zone, if you will, as a whole language. It's a whole system in and of itself. And so with that, you only have so much time in a day to get really good at something, and that's the really tough decision for head coaches and coordinators. What do we want to be great at? If you want to be great at outside zone, you got to spend a lot of time running outside zone, and then you also have to pair that with all of your play action passes. Your play action passes are going to work off of the runs that you run well and are successful running. So you got your keepers, all your past 15, 14 weeks, past 18, the plays that go off of your outside zone plays will end up being your play action passes, which affects now the passing game. So when you're really putting together a system, and certainly with play action passes, it all starts off of your run game. What are you going to be good at? You can't be great at everything. You just can't. So what are you going to hang your hat on? And if it's going to be outside zone, it takes time.